This short presentation is intended to summarize the environmental requirements applicable to emergency tenant-based rental assistance programs, or TBRA, being funded by home participating jurisdictions in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Every home-funded activity or project is subject to some level of environmental review. In some cases, there are activities which are exempt from NEPA and the related laws and authorities, while at the other end of the extreme are projects which require the preparation of an environmental impact statement and even mitigation of the project's impact on our environment. The environmental review rule found at 24 CFR Part 58 requires home participating jurisdictions to do 4 things. First, PJs have to identify the level of review based on the proposed activity or aggregated activities for environmental review purposes. The specific level of review will vary based on the type of activity and project-specific circumstances. Next, of course, PJs have to carry out and document the review, the substance and details of which vary depending on the classification of the activity. Then, when the project is carried out, the PJ and its partners who are receiving the funding need to be sure to meet any applicable environmental requirements raised by the type of activity in general or the project's specific context. Finally, as with all other aspects of the home program, a PJ has to document the review process, determination, and any subsequent actions in the environmental review record for the activity. So let's walk through how this works with an emergency TBRA program. The first step, determining the level of review, is straightforward. TBRA programs are classified as categorically excluded, not subject to Section 58.5, which is abbreviated as CENST. TBRA is an activity that HUD has determined is categorically excluded from NEPA and would not alter any conditions that would require an environmental review or compliance determination under the federal laws and authorities cited in Section 58.5 of HUD's environmental review regulations, things like historic preservation or farmland protection. Once the PJ has classified its TBRA program as categorically excluded, not subject to, the next step is to conduct the review and document it in the environmental review record. This is typically done at a program level for the entire TBRA program. While TBRA is excluded from NEPA and not subject to the other federal laws and requirements listed in Section 58.5, it is still subject to the environmental compliance requirements listed in Section 58.6, which consist of requirements in 3 areas. The first relates to flood zones. The applicable statutes around flood zones and flood insurance do not apply to TBRA. TBRA is permissible in a flood zone without the requirement for flood insurance. This said, it's certainly a good idea to encourage residents of flood zones to have flood insurance. The next 58.6 requirement is based on the Coastal Barrier Resources Act. As a general rule, HUD assistance, including for TBRA, cannot be provided inside of a coastal barrier resource zone. There are many states and local PJs without any coastal barrier resources, so the PJ can document the absence of such zones in review files. But if the PJ has coastal barrier zone within its jurisdiction, the PJ will need to restrict assistance from being provided within those areas. The third 58.6 requirement pertains to airport clear zones. Federal requirements pertain to development within those zones. Since TBRA is not a development activity, those requirements do not apply. Therefore, the bottom line is that the only environmental requirement applicable to TBRA is coastal barrier resource zones. The final step, which is really an overarching obligation, not simply the last thing you do, is to document everything in the environmental review record. Under Part 58, categorically excluded not subject to reviews do not require public notification, nor do PJs submit a request for release of funds and certification to HUD. So the environmental review record, which completes the environmental review process for TBRA, should include the determination, the completed review, and any project-specific documentation showing that assistance was not provided inside of a coastal barrier zone. As the final step, the PJ must maintain the TBRA environmental review record throughout the project and for the appropriate retention period. PJs need to remember that they cannot commit or expend home or other funds prior to completion of environmental review. However, a categorically excluded not subject to review should be able to be completed quickly and does not require any publication or a request for release of funds from HUD. If you have no zones, you'll be able to make a program-wide determination. If there are coastal zones in the community, then you'll need to specify in the local program guidelines that the PJ will not fund assistance inside of a coastal zone, and then check and document that each unit assisted is, in fact, outside of those zones. HUD has a suggested format for categorically excluded not subject to reviews, and a sample one for COVID-19 related emergency TBRA programs is linked from both the HUD Exchange page for this video FAQ and the Home Program COVID-19 page. That sample includes color-coded placeholders where a PJ can insert specific local information and potential language for the determinations possible under the Coastal Barrier Resource Zone part of the checklist. A PJ can also choose to complete the review using the HUD Environmental Review online system, known as HEROES, instead of the paper format. Environmental review for emergency TBRA programs is a critical and important step from a compliance standpoint, but a PJ should be able to make the determination and proceed with the delivery of emergency TBRA assistance quickly.